You are standing in a lush, emerald green garden, holding a shovel, yet every time you turn the earth, you are unknowingly declaring war on the very life that sustains it. We've been taught that to grow life, we must first break the ground, but in the next 20 minutes, you'll realize that your quest for perfect soil is actually the one thing turning your land into a desert. Imagine a bustling subterranean metropolis, a network of highways and skyscrapers more complex than Tokyo, all existing in a single handful of dirt. When you plunge a tiller or a spade into that earth, you aren't just loosening the soil, you are triggering an ecological earthquake that levels the city and kills the inhabitants. Most of us see soil as a static medium, like a pot of clay, but it is actually a biological engine that thrives on stability, not disruption. I remember watching an old farmer named Elias, a man whose hands looked like gnarled oak roots, as he stood over a neighbor's freshly tilled field. The dirt was soft, dark, and looked like a gardener's dream, but Elias just shook his head and whispered, "They're burning the bank account to stay warm for one night." At the time, it made no sense. How could making the soil fluffy be a mistake? But here, where it gets interesting. When you flip the soil, you expose the delicate, thread-like networks of mycorrhizal fungi to the air and sun, effectively vaporizing the internet of the underworld. These fungi are the brokers of the soil. They trade minerals for carbon, reaching out further than any plant root could ever dream. By tilling, you sever these connections, forcing your plants to become welfare recipients of synthetic fertilizers because they can no longer feed themselves. Nature never leaves the soil bare, yet we spend our weekends stripping it down to the skin. This creates a massive surge of oxygen that causes a carbon fire, where the organic matter in your soil literally burns up into the atmosphere as CO2. You see a temporary growth spurt in your plants and think you've succeeded, but that's just the soil's last gasp, a desperate release of nutrients that should have lasted for years. Why haven't you heard this before? It isn't a conspiracy, but it is a matter of momentum. Our entire agricultural industry was built on the back of the plow, a tool that was revolutionary 4,000 years ago, but is now our greatest liability. We've been sold the idea that the clean look of bare brown earth is the gold standard of gardening, when in reality, bare soil is a wound. If you want to understand the logic, look at the forest floor. No one goes into the woods to till the earth or spread 10-10-10 fertilizer, yet the forest produces more biomass than any farm on the planet. The secret is the litter layer, a constant, protective skin of organic material that stays undisturbed, allowing a complex hierarchy of biology to manage the nutrients. And this changes everything. That's a discovery for another day. Instead of turning the soil over, you layer organic matter compost. Leaves, straw directly on can survive droughts that wither conventional plots. They aren't just holding dirt, they are holding an internal reservoir. Top of the surface. Think of it as a slow-motion meal for the earth. Underneath that blanket, earthworms become your personal construction crew, tunneling through the compacted layers and creating aeration channels that are far more effective than any mechanical tool. But wait, how do you plant into a solid surface? You simply move the mulch aside and tuck your seedling into the undisturbed earth. By keeping the structure intact, you maintain the pore space, the tiny tunnels and pockets that hold water like a sponge. This is why no-till gardens can survive droughts that wither conventional plots. They aren't just holding dirt, they are holding an internal reservoir. That's not the full story, though. The transition period can be humbling. If your soil has been tilled for years, it's currently addicted to the cycle of disruption. In the first season of leaving it alone, you might see weeds or slower growth as the fungi begin to re-establish their broken networks. It's a test of patience, a shift from the instant gratification of chemicals to the long-term wealth of biology. As the biology returns, the chemistry of your soil changes. You'll notice the color shifting from a light, sandy tan to a rich, deep chocolate brown, the color of sequestered carbon. You'll find that the soil no longer forms a hard crust after a rainstorm, and the water no longer pools on top. It vanishes instantly into the hungry earth. We have spent decades fighting the earth, trying to force it into a state of productivity through sheer mechanical will. We've treated the soil like a blank canvas when it's actually a living tapestry. The moment you stop breaking the ground is the moment you start building a legacy that will feed you for a lifetime. So the next time you feel the urge to turn the earth, put the shovel down. Look at the ground not as something to be conquered, but as a community to be protected. The most powerful thing you can do for your garden isn't a new technique or a specialized tool, it's the decision to do nothing at all. True abundance isn't found in what we can extract from the earth, but in how well we can stay out of its way. If you're wondering what happens to the weeds when you stop tilling, the answer is far more tactical than you might expect. You might expect that leaving the soil alone would invite a weed invasion of biblical proportions, but the opposite is true. Tilling is actually the world's most effective way to plant weeds. Deep in the earth lies a seed bank, millions of dormant seeds waiting for a single flash of sunlight to trigger their growth. When you turn the soil, you are effectively waking up a sleeping army and giving them the perfect conditions to take over. By keeping the ground covered and undisturbed, those seeds remain buried and dormant, locked away in the dark. But here's the shift in perspective. Even the weeds that do appear are trying to tell you a story about your soil's health. Dandelions aren't just an eyesore, they are biological drills sent to break up deep compaction with their massive taproots. In a no-till system, as your soil becomes porous and healthy, the need for these colonizer plants disappears, and they simply stop showing up. This leads us to the most critical layer of the system, the living root. Soil biology doesn't just need a roof over its head, it needs a constant supply of energy. Plants pump up to 40% of the energy they create from the sun down into their roots as exudates, essentially liquid sugar. This isn't an accident, it's a payment. They are feeding the bacteria and fungi in exchange for protection and minerals. That's not the full story, though. When we leave the ground bare in the winter, or between crops, we are effectively starving the underground workforce. This is why cover cropping is the secret weapon of the world's most productive plots. Instead of a brown, dead patch of dirt, you keep something growing at all times. Even in the dead of winter, those roots are holding the soil together, preventing erosion and keeping the biological fire burning. But what about compaction? Most people believe that if they don't fluff the soil, it will become as hard as concrete. This is a fundamental misunderstanding of soil physics. Soil doesn't compact because it hasn't been stirred, it compacts because it lacks glues. A specific protein called glomalin produced by fungi acts like the mortar between bricks. Without it, the soil particles collapse into a dense, airless mass. By tilling, you destroy the very organisms that create the air pockets you're trying to make. And this changes everything for your workload. In a traditional garden, you are caught in a cycle of till, weed, water, repeat. In a biologically active system, the earthworms do the tilling, the mulch does the weeding, and the increased organic matter does the watering. You aren't working harder, you're managing a workforce of billions. It's the difference between running a treadmill and riding a downhill bike. The results aren't just aesthetic. Plants grown in undisturbed, biologically rich soil have higher nutrient density. They have more complex flavor profiles because they have access to a full spectrum of trace minerals that synthetic fertilizers simply don't provide. You can literally taste the difference between a vegetable grown in dirt and one grown in soil. We've been taught to look at the plant, but we should have been looking at the foundation. The mistake we all make is thinking we are the protagonists of the garden. We aren't, we are the stewards. The real work is happening beneath your boots, in the dark, silent depths where life is being built one grain of sand at a time. If you can resist the urge to interfere, the earth will reward you with a resilience you never thought possible. You will move from a state of constant struggle to a state of observation and partnership. The ground was never broken. It only becomes broken when we try to fix it. Real power doesn't come from the blade of a plow, but from the patience to let the earth heal itself. If you're ready to see exactly what to layer on your soil this weekend to start the healing process, the blueprint is simpler than you think. The blueprint starts with a simple realization: your soil is hungry. If you look at a forest, you'll see the horizon, a layer of decomposing leaves that acts as both a pantry and a suit of armor. To replicate this in your backyard, we use a method often called sheet mulching, but think of it as building a floor rather than digging a hole. You start by suppressing the existing vegetation without chemicals. Instead of pulling weeds which just stirs the seed bank, you smother them. A thick layer of plain, unwaxed cardboard serves as your base. This acts as a biodegradable barrier that kills off the grass while providing a feast for fungi. But here is where most people fail. They stop there. But here, where it gets interesting. Cardboard alone is just a barrier. You need to kickstart the nitrogen cycle. On top of that cardboard, you lay down 2 to 4 inches of high-quality compost. This isn't just dirt, it's a biological starter culture. By placing it on top, you're inviting the earthworms to migrate upward. They will eat the cardboard, tunnel through the compost, and carry those nutrients deep into the subsoil, doing the heavy lifting while you sit on your porch. And this changes everything for your water bill. Every 1% increase in organic matter in your soil allows it to hold an additional 20,000 gallons of water per acre. By layering organic material on the surface, you stop evaporation in its tracks. In a conventional garden, the sun bakes the bare earth into a brick, pulling moisture out like a straw. In a no-dig system, the soil stays cool and moist, even in the heat of mid-July. That's not the full story, though. The final touch is the carbon cap. You cover your compost with a layer of wood chips, straw, or shredded leaves. This protects the microbes from UV rays, which are lethal to the very bacteria you're trying to cultivate. It's a closed-loop system. As that top layer breaks down, it feeds the compost layer, which feeds the soil, which feeds the plant. You might wonder, if I'm not digging, how do I handle the drainage? In a tilled garden, you often create a plow pan, a hard, impenetrable layer of clay just below the reach of your tiller. Water hits this layer and sits, rotting your plant roots. In a no-till system, the deep roots of your previous crops and the tunnels of perennial insects create macropores. These are natural pipes that allow heavy rain to move through the soil like a sponge rather than a bathtub. We've been conditioned to think that gardening is about cleaning the earth, but a healthy garden is actually quite messy. It's full of decaying matter, various insects, and layers of different materials. This mess is actually the highest form of order. It is a self-regulating ecosystem that requires less input from you every single year. The transition from a tiller to a steward is a psychological shift as much as a physical one. You have to get comfortable with the idea that the most productive thing you can do for your land is to leave it alone. You are moving from a model of extraction to a model of investment. The first year you stop tilling, you are paying off the soil debt you've accumulated. By the third year, you are living off the interest. You'll find that your plants are more resistant to pests, not because you've sprayed them, but because their immune systems are bolstered by the complex biology in the ground. When we stop breaking the soil, we stop breaking the cycle of life. We move from being an intruder in our own gardens to being a participant in a much older, much wiser process. The earth knows how to grow. It's been doing it for millions of years without a single shovel. True mastery isn't found in how much you can change the land, but in how much you can let the land change you. If you're curious about which specific cover crops can actually replace your fertilizer entirely, the science behind green manure is the final piece of the puzzle. The final piece of the puzzle isn't a bag of chemicals. It is a living, breathing blanket of green manure. If you've ever wondered how nature maintains its fertility without human intervention, the answer lies in plants that don't just take from the soil, but give back with interest. By using specific cover crops like clover, vetch, or peas, you are essentially growing your own nitrogen right in the bed. These plants have a unique partnership with bacteria that allows them to pull nitrogen from the air and fix it into the soil in a form other plants can use. But here, where it gets interesting. When these cover crops reach their peak, you don't pull them out or till them in. You simply crimp them or cut them at the base, leaving the roots in the ground to rot and the tops on the surface as a fresh mulch. This creates a root channeling effect where the old roots leave behind perfect tunnels for your next crop to follow. You are essentially using the biology of one plant to build the highway for the next. And this changes everything. By the time you reach your third or fourth season of this hands-off approach, the soil structure becomes so resilient that it feels like walking on a cloud. You'll notice that the heavy, back-breaking labor of preparing the beds has vanished. Your spring ritual shifts from fighting the earth to simply observing it. You become a conductor of a biological symphony, ensuring the right players are in place while the soil performs the heavy lifting. That's not the full story, though. The ultimate validation of this method isn't just the size of your harvest, it's the return of the forgotten helpers. You'll see a surge in predatory insects, ground beetles, and spiders that act as a natural security force, keeping pests in check before they ever reach your crops. The one mistake of tilling didn't just kill the soil, it killed the balance. By stopping that cycle, you are inviting the balance to return. We've spent generations believing that to be a good gardener, we had to be busy digging, weeding, and sweat-drenched. But the hidden truth is that the most vibrant life happens in the absence of our interference. The earth is not a machine that needs to be serviced. It is a living organism that needs to be respected. The most profound growth doesn't happen when we break the ground, but when we finally learn to let it be whole. If you want to see the specific plant combinations that can transform a dead patch of dirt into a high-yield oasis in a single season, the results might surprise you. The ultimate transformation happens when you stop thinking about crops and start thinking about communities. In a traditional garden, you plant a row of one thing and leave the soil around it exposed, creating a vacuum that nature desperately tries to fill with weeds. But in a high-yield, no-till system, you use intercropping, planting diverse species together, so that every square inch of the soil surface is shielded by a living canopy. But here, where it gets interesting. When you plant a heavy feeder like broccoli next to a nitrogen fixer like crimson clover, you aren't just saving space. You are creating a biological siphon. The clover feeds the soil bacteria, and the broccoli taps into that nutrient stream through the fungal network we've worked so hard to protect. This isn't just gardening, it's a subterranean economy where everyone wins, and the profit is a harvest that is more resilient to disease than anything grown in a sterile, tilled row. And this changes everything about the why of gardening. We've been sold a version of land management that is rooted in scarcity, the idea that we must fight for every tomato and kill every competitor. But when you see a no-till bed in its third year, you see a system of radical abundance. You realize that the soil isn't a finite resource to be used up, but a self-renewing battery that gets stronger the more life you pack into it. The one mistake of tilling was born from a fear that the earth wouldn't provide unless we forced it. The fix is the courage to trust the biology. That's not the full story, though. The real-world implication of this shift goes beyond your backyard fence. If every gardener and farmer stopped tilling, we would sequester enough carbon to fundamentally alter the trajectory of our atmosphere. Your decision to put down the spade is a local act with a global resonance. You are participating in the healing of the planet, 1 square foot at a time, simply by choosing to let the earth remain undisturbed. We often think of progress as a more complicated machine or a faster process, but in the case of our soil, progress is a return to ancient, quiet wisdom. The most productive land on earth didn't need us to fix it. It only needed us to understand it. When you look at your garden now, you shouldn't see a list of chores, but a thriving civilization that you have been invited to protect. The soil is a mirror of our relationship with the world. When we treat it with violence and disruption, it becomes brittle and needy. When we treat it with patience and cover, it becomes generous and resilient. The ground was never meant to be broken. It was meant to be the foundation for everything that lives. The greatest tool in your garden isn't a tiller or a plow, it is your own restraint. If you're ready to see the side-by-side nutritional analysis of no-till, vegetables versus store-bought produce, the data reveals a gap that most of us never suspected. The nutritional gap between a store-bought carrot and one grown in undisturbed, living soil is not just a matter of taste, it is a matter of medicine. Most commercial produce is grown in dead soil, pumped full of the big 3 nutrients nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium to make them look large and vibrant. But because the fungal networks have been obliterated by the plow, these plants can't access the 60+ trace minerals and micronutrients that only a healthy soil biology can unlock. You are eating the empty calories of the plant world, filling your stomach while your cells remain hungry. But here, where it gets interesting. When you stop tilling, your plants begin to produce secondary metabolites, complex compounds like polyphenols and antioxidants that they use to defend themselves against pests. In a tilled system, we use pesticides to do this work, so the plant becomes lazy and never develops these nutrients. In a no-dig garden, the plant has to be tough, and that toughness is exactly what provides the life-saving nutrients your body craves. You aren't just growing food, you are growing a pharmacy. And this changes everything about the future of your land. The one mistake of tilling is a relic of a time when we didn't understand the invisible world. Now that we can see the microscopic cities beneath our feet, continuing to break the earth is like trying to fix a watch with a hammer. The path forward is not found in a new chemical or a more powerful machine, but in the humble act of stepping back. By simply covering the earth and keeping your tools in the shed, You allow the most sophisticated technology on the planet, nature itself, to go back to work. That's not the full story, though. The true legacy of a no-till garden isn't measured in pounds of produce, but in the health of the soil you leave behind for the next generation. A tilled garden is a sunset, a system slowly burning through its capital until nothing is left but dust. A no-till garden is a sunrise, a compounding investment that grows richer, darker, and more alive with every passing season. We have spent centuries trying to break the land, only to find that we were breaking ourselves. The moment we stop fighting the ground is the moment we finally start to grow. It is a quiet revolution, happening one handful of dark, crumbly, undisturbed earth at a time. The soil isn't just under our feet, it is the source of our past and the only hope for our future. The most profound growth doesn't happen when we break the ground, but when we finally learn to let it be whole. If you're wondering which specific biological triggers you can add to your compost today to double your earthworm population by next month, the answer is hidden in your kitchen scraps.